Hello, I'm Dalbir Singh, and today I will discuss the differences between the CHAR and VARCHAR data types in SQL Server. I've often found new developers have trouble understanding the difference between these types, so hopefully this video clears that up a bit. Okay, let's start with some theory. I have a heap table here called aircraft, and it has only one column called aircraft type, which is a char 10 data type. And I've got 4 rows of data here that contain various aircraft models. Now on this first row, the content 777, you may assume takes up around 3 bytes of storage, but it actually takes up an entire 10 bytes on the row. And that's true for all of the rows in the table. The full 10 bytes are allocated to each row, regardless of the content size. So we often refer to the char data type as a fixed length column. So now let's see what this table would look like if we used a varchar data type. And as you can see here on the right, only the amount of bytes required for the content are allocated to the row. Any of these bytes that could have been allocated will be used by the underlying page to store other data. And so the same is true on the second row, where we're using 7 bytes of storage instead of the entire 10. Now, you may find if you dig deeper that a lot of your varchar content sizes are always +2 of what they should be. And the reason for that is that SQL Server adds offset bytes to varchar data. Now, I've drawn these offset bytes close to the content here just for illustration purposes. They're normally stored in a collection or an array on the row, and they basically store the offset information for where the content starts and ends for that varchar column. Okay, so let's see what would happen if we were to update the first row in the char table to a longer string. Well, when we perform this update, we find that the updated string goes straight into the column without any issue, and that's because there was already 10 bytes allocated to the row. So there's no issue here. But if we try and do the same thing on the row in the varchar table, you can already see an issue. We've only got 3 bytes of storage allocated. So the larger string, 777-200, will not fit. So what do you think SQL Server will do? Well, if we continue with this update, a row expansion will occur, and effectively this moves the row into another location on the current page where the column can be expanded, or the row rather, can be expanded so that we can accommodate the larger string. And not forgetting the 2 offset bytes, of course. Now, if there's not enough room on the current page, the row will go effectively off page, which is just another way of saying it goes onto another page. And that's a really important point to be aware of, because if this happens a lot on a varchar column, then it will affect the query performance, because you'll be increasing the amount of logical reads that you're having to do, more specifically reading more pages. The original position of the row is still maintained, it's just that it changes to a pointer reference, which will then point to this new location. It's also worth bearing in mind what would happen if we were to update this content once again with perhaps a larger string. Well, a row expansion would probably occur again, but SQL Server is smart enough to update the original row pointer to point to the new location of the row expansion, which is exactly what we want. We don't want pages upon pages daisy-chained to get to our varchar content. So now that you understand the difference between the char and varchar data types, which one should you use? As always, it depends. I tend to use the char data type whenever I'm working on an intensive write-focus system, and typically where the content length is always consistent, such as a zip or postal code. There is a performance penalty, however, in reads due to storage consumption. For everything else, I tend to just use VARCHAR, and it's usually the better choice. The read performance is better, along with the storage consumption. But conversely to CHAR, the writes, and such as updates, tend to suffer due to row expansions. Okay, so that's the theory done. Now we're going to look at the storage usage in SQL Server. We're in SQL Management Studio now, and I'm going to begin by creating those two tables that we saw earlier. So I have added a suffix at the end of each table to highlight the column's data type. So C for CHAR and V for VARCHAR. So I'm going to create these tables. And now I'm going to insert around 25,000 rows into each table. The content is highlighted here, and I've just included a hint as to what the column type is, just to make it easier when we come to selecting the data. So 737C for CHAR and 737V for VARCHAR. So let's execute this. And there we go, the data is inserted. I'm just going to do a quick sanity check. And there's the data in the CHAR table. And there's the data in the VARCHAR table. Great. So now I'm going to show you the space usage per table. And to do this, we can use a built-in stored procedure called sp_space used. And we can supply a parameter to an object. In our case, it will be a table object. So we'll say dbo aircraft_c. And we'll do the same for the VARCHAR table as well. Change that to a V, and let's execute this. And there we go. We've now got storage information for both of our tables. And what becomes immediately obvious is that the CHAR table is up to 3 times the size of the VARCHAR table. Now, to understand this, let's scroll back up to our table definitions. We're using CHAR 50 and VARCHAR 50, and the content length for each table is exactly the same. It's around 4 characters, and we have 25,000 rows in each table. Now, if you remember from the theory lessons, for the CHAR data type, it's referred to as what's known as a fixed data type length. And so that means that all 50 bytes are allocated to every single row, regardless of the content size. With VARCHAR, only as many bytes as required by the content length are allocated to each row. So this goes to explaining why the VARCHAR consumes far less space when it comes to table storage. Finally, if you'd like to find out more about the differences between VARCHAR and CHAR data types, I highly recommend the SQL Server online documentation. I will include a link to this page in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more SQL Server content. Thanks for watching.